Hey guys, Uncommon Ramen here with another TCG Tuesday. Before I get into the video, let me remind you that if you like my content, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. And if you'd like to be notified when the content drops, hit the bell icon so you can get that notification when I put it on YouTube. Also, if you feel the need to support me, hit me up on my Patreon at patreon.com/uncommonramen, capital U, capital R. I do all of this in my free time, so any amount of support will help me bring more of this content to you more often. And without further ado, we're going to take a look at another deck tech. This is an upgrade to the Savine, the Chronoclasm flashback deck. This is going to be a flashback spell slinger deck. So strap and enjoy this. By the time this video releases, the Double Masters 2022 set will have released. Unfortunately, I pre-ordered mine online, so I will not receive it in time to do a video for that in this place. So you'll see the video from my Double Masters 2022 unboxing the following week. So without further ado, let's take a look at Savine the Chronoclasm. So Savine is 5 in Jeskai colors, which is red, white, and blue. Which, I mean, obviously with 4th of July right behind us and everything, why not do a red, white, and blue deck? Legendary creature, human wizard, 2/2. You prevent all damage that would be dealt to Savine the Chronoclasm, and whenever you cast your first instant or sorcery spell from your graveyard each turn, you can copy that spell and choose new targets for it. So the idea here is to cast stuff from your graveyard. Obviously, one of the best ways to do that is to utilize the flashback mechanic, but obviously mechanics like Jumpstart and Retrace and Aftermath all have similar effects there, so those would work too. So what you're going to see here is a lot of that, a lot of copying flashback effects. One thing that I didn't put in here that I just honestly didn't have a spare of was Twinning Staff. If you have a Twinning Staff, I would use it. Twinning Staff basically says that if a spell gets copied, copy it again. And it has its own built-in way to copy a spell. I just didn't have any. Also, I have a couple cards, Pariah's Shield and Pariah, that I am will basically have on the way to put in this deck, because Chronoclasm with a Pariah or a Pariah's Shield makes it very difficult to deal combat damage to you, so it forces your opponents to have to spot remove the Savine. So, you know, hexproof. We need to get hexproof in here, but I'm pretty sure I have boots, and if I don't, then I'm just a fool. So anyway, that's Savine the Chronoclasm. Next up, we are going to take a look at the creatures, and there are several very good ones in here. Starting with Archmage, or Archmage, I don't know how you pronounce it, Emeritus. He is 4 for a 2/2 Magecraft. When you copy or cast a spell, instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. So basically doing exactly what we are planning on doing with the Spell Slinger deck. If we cast an instant or sorcery spell or copy that instant or sorcery spell, we're going to draw some cards. Then we got ourselves a Backdraft Hellkite. This is 5 for a 4/4 flying. When Backdraft Hellkite attacks, each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to their mana cost. So this is obviously in here to flashback some of the cards in here that aren't the instants and sorceries in here that don't have flashback already. But it's also really important because some of the flashback cards some of the flashback costs on cards from later sets after the Odyssey block have much higher costs than their original casting costs. And so Backdraft Hellkite kind of helps to mitigate the amount of mana that you have to spend on newer flashback cards. Next up, we have Crackling Drake. This is 4 for a star 4. It's flying, and its power is equal to the total number of instant and sorcery cards you own in exile and in your graveyard. and when Crackling Drake enters the battlefield, you get to draw a card. This is really good in a flashback deck, and most importantly, also with Jumpstart in it as well, because the idea here is that we are going to be exiling those cards after they've been recast, and so his power will continue to stay the same as opposed to something like the, I think it was Enigma Drake. Next up, we have Elsha the Infinite. This is 5 for a 3/3 Prowess. You may look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may cast the top card of your library if it is a non-creature, non-land card, and you may cast it as though it had flash. So, cool things here is that you can cast sorceries as though they had flash. This card itself has prowess, so every time you cast an instant or sorcery, or actually, I should take that back. Each time you cast a non-creature spell, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And also, you just kind of get to look at the top card of your library, so you get to know what's happening next turn before you would normally get to know. Next, we have Errant Street Artist. Truth be told, this is in here for one major reason, and that reason is that I did not have an extra Harmonic Prodigy laying around. Harmonic Prodigy would allow you to double an activated ability of a wizard or a shaman. So Sevinne, being a wizard, his copy ability would be doubled. So in lieu of the fact that I did not have the Harmonic Prodigy, I used Errant Street Artist. This is 1 blue for a 0/3 Flash Defender haste. You can tap 1 and a blue and it to copy target spell you control that wasn't cast. You may choose new targets for the copy. So, wasn't cast, meaning that you can copy a copy. So, if you flash something back, Savine is going to copy that, or at least the first thing you flash back, and then you can use Errant Street Artist to copy the copy. So, it's kind of like having the Harmonic Prodigy, except way less efficient. So definitely use the Harmonic Prodigy. Next up, we have Goblin Electromancer. 2 for a 2/2 instant and sorcery spells you cast. Cost 1 less to cast. So obviously we're just trying to drop down the cost of these spells as much as possible. Next, we have God Eternal Kefnet. God Eternal Kefnet is 4 for a 4/5 flying. You may reveal the first card you draw each turn as you draw it. Whenever you reveal an instant or sorcery card this way, copy that card, and you may cast that copy. The copy costs 2 less to cast. When God Eternal Kefnet dies, it is put into exile from the battlefield. You may put it into its owner's library, 3rd from the top. So, first and foremost, this guy is very hard to get rid of. Secondly, it gives you a weird way to copy your spells. So when it sees it being drawn after you reveal it, if it's an instant or sorcery, it reduces the cost of that instant or sorcery by 2 and allows you to cast a copy that it's talking about. And that particular copy, because you're not actually casting a spell, you're copying it, can be targeted by the Errant Street Artist. So it's just a really good synergy with this deck. Next up, we have Gutter Snipe. 3 for a 2/2. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Gutter Snipe deals 2 damage to each opponent. It's a very necessary incremental damage card. Next, we have Kaikar. Wind's Fury. This is 4 in Jeskai colors. Flying, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you get to put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. And you can sacrifice the spirit to add red mana. This is really cool because you can utilize tokens for mana, kind of like, treasure tokens in a sense. So if you have any big red spells that you're saving up for, this will do it. And one of the win conditions in here is an X spell, so, can't argue with that. Then we have Lear, Disciple of the Drowned. 5 for a 3/4, spells can't be countered. Each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard has flashback. The flashback cost is equal to that card's mana cost. So we're being redundant with the idea of giving cards in your graveyard flashback because you're not always going to guaranteed get Lear or Backdraft Dragon. Next up, we have River Kelpie. This is 5 for a 3/3. Whenever River Kelpie or another permanent enters the battlefield from the graveyard, draw a card. And whenever a player casts a spell from a graveyard, draw a card. And it has Persist. So if it would die, you can return to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it. Assuming it didn't already have a -1/-1 counter, right? If it had, yeah. So it'll come back one more time. Whenever a player casts a spell from a graveyard, draw a card. So essentially exactly what we're doing. We're missing out on the first ability of the River Kelpie, except for when the River Kelpie enters the battlefield, because there isn't a whole lot of creatures in here that are going to recur themselves. Next, we have Stormkiln Artist. 4 for 2/2. Stormkiln Artist gets +1/+0 for each artifact you control. And Magecraft, whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, create a treasure token. This is like right up the alley of this deck. We are going to be casting and copying spells a lot. So we're going to create tons of treasure tokens, which is going to give him a lot of power or give us the ability to cast an X spell to outright kill somebody. Next up, we have Sun Titan. This is 6 for a 6/6 Vigilance. When Sun Titan enters the battlefield or attacks, you may return target permanent card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is one of the few things that recurs permanents from your graveyard, so this is one of the few things that will help River Kelpie get its extra value from things returning from the graveyard. Next up, we have Talrin, Sky Summoner. This guy is 4 for a 2/2. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 2/2 blue Drake creature token with flying. So we can get some flying 2/2 out there, 2/2s out there for a small army to try and get some incremental damage done. Next, we have Thalia's Geist Caller. This is 3 for a 3/1 lifelink. Whenever you cast a spell from your graveyard, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying, and then you can sacrifice a spirit to give the Geist Caller indestructible until end of turn. The indestructible part is really important, but creating those spirits with Kaikar on the field just helps to fuel the next X spell you play. And then lastly, we got Vega the Watcher. This is 3 for a 2/2 flying. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, you get to draw a card. So it's very similar to the River Kelpie's ability, and just a really darn right good card. All right, next we're going to take a look at the instants. And as you can imagine, there are quite a few instants and sorceries in this deck, since we are a Spellslinger deck. Starting with Arcane Infusion. This is 2. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal an instant or sorcery card from among them, put that into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And it flashes back for 5. And this is what I was talking about, where the Backdraft Dragon would give it another flashback cost of just the 2. And that's why it's so important to have things like the Backdraft Demon or the Leer, Disciple of the Drowned in there. Next up, we have Chemister's Insight. This is 4, draw 2 cards, and you can jumpstart it. So jumpstart, if you don't know, you can cast this card from your graveyard by discarding a card and paying its normal casting costs. So 4 and discard a card. Again, with Backdraft Demon and Leer, Disciple of the Drowned, it wouldn't replace the jumpstart. It would also get a flashback cost of 4, which is just downright better than paying the jumpstart cost. Next up, we have Desperate Ravings. This is 2. Draw 2 cards, then discard a card at random. It has a flashback cost of 3, including 1 blue. We've got Electric Revelation. This is 3 as an additional cost to cast this spell. Discard a card. Draw 2 cards. Flashback for 4. Got Fact or Fiction. 4. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles. Put 1 pile into your hand and the other pile into your graveyard. Super good card. I've talked about this in a lot of different videos. The newer the player, the worse they are at separating the cards. Faithful Mending. Blue and a white. You gain 2 life, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. Flashback for 3. Just a really good card in here. We got Farm to Market. 3 for farm. Destroy target attacking or blocking creature, my bad. And then 3 for Market Aftermath, so it can be cast from your only from your graveyard. Then it gets exiled. Draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. Next up, we have Galvanic Iteration. 2, whenever you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for that copy. And then it has a flashback of 3. Next, we have Increasing Vengeance. This is 2 to copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. If this spell was cast from a graveyard, copy that spell twice instead. You may choose new targets for the copies, and it has flashback for 5. This will help you with one of the win conditions. Next, we have Magma Quake. This is X into red. Magma Quake deals X damage to each creature without flying and each planeswalker. It's board wipe, not super good board wipe. Rather use Blasphemous Act, but if the only thing we can hit is everything but flyers, then so be it. At least it hits planeswalkers. Next, we have Memory Deluge. This guy hiked in price shortly after the release of Midnight Hunt and has since dropped pretty significantly. Still has, I believe, a $2 price tag, but definitely fallen from grace. It is 4, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast this spell. Put 2 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order, and it has flashback for 7. Next, we have Una's Grace. This is 3, target player draws a card, and it has Retrace. Retrace says you may cast this card from your graveyard by discarding a land card in addition to paying its other costs. The beauty of Una's Grace, and really any card that has Retrace, is that it does not have the exile it afterward clause. So once you recast this, it's just going to go right back into your graveyard to be retraced again. The downside being that it's very specific what you have to discard in addition to its cost, and that is lands. So as you run out of lands, this card becomes less and less viable. Next, we have Prismatic Strands. It's 3 to prevent all damage that sources of the color of your choice would deal this turn, and it has flashback, tap an untapped white creature you control. I love the flashback cost because you can be tapped out to flash it back. As far as mana is concerned. And the ability itself is just super good, especially if you're facing monocolored decks. Even if you're not facing monocolored decks, a large portion of dual-colored decks use gold creatures, so it still hits those. Next up, we have Purify the Grave. This is 1 exile target card from a graveyard, flashback for 1 white. Any kind of graveyard hate is super useful, especially these days. There's tons of graveyard manipulation, so being able to get rid of those really pesky cards that hit the graveyard that just should not be there, this is the way to do it. Next up, we have Ray of Distortion. This guy costs 4, destroy target artifact or enchantment, flashes back for 6. Next, we have Refuse to Cooperate. This is 4, refuse. Deals damage to target spell's controller equal to that spell's converted mana cost. The best way to cast this is if somebody casts an X spell, but if you can't, you just cast it against something that has a huge mana cost. And then for Cooperate, it is 3, has to be cast, or can only be cast from your graveyard. Copy target instant or sorcery spell. You may choose new targets for that copy. Again, playing to the theme of copying as much as possible. And then last but not least in the instance, we have Think Twice. This is 2, draw a card, flashback for 3. Next, we're going to take a look at sorceries. Like I said, quite a few sorceries, just like there are quite a few instants. Starting with Beacon Bolt. This is 3. Beacon Bolt deals damage equal to, deals damage to target creature equal to the total number of instant and sorcery cards you own in exile and in your graveyard, and it has Jumpstart. Again, the idea behind this was to utilize it with Jumpstart because that's the set it came out in, but because Flashback also exiles when it gets recast, it also takes advantage of the exiled cards from Flashback and just makes this so much better. Next, we have Deep Analysis. This is probably one of the most important flashback cards. And I say that because it stood the test of time. This was printed in the Odyssey block, and it was used in Simic Madness decks. And I know I said Madness as opposed to flashback. Simic Madness decks ran Roar of the Worm, Deep Analysis, and I think one other flashback spell that I can't remember off the top of my head, with Quiet Speculation, and it's just a darn good card for its flashback cost. It is 4, target player draws 2 cards, you can flash it back for 2, and pay 3 life. So you pay 3 life, draw 2 cards. Not a bad return. Next, we have Devil's Play. This is one of your win conditions. Devil's Play costs X and a red and deals X damage to any target. You want to basically dump as much mana into this to annihilate a player. And then for a flashback cost of X and 3 red, you can do that again. But as long as you have Sevinne on the table or some way to copy it, you can copy the target, or you can copy the spell and hit 2 players with it and potentially take out the other 2 players at the table if you're playing a 3-player game or a 4-player game. Next, we have Divine Reckoning. Each player chooses a creature they control and then destroys the rest. It is 4, and it has a flashback of 7. Next, we have Dawn to Dusk. Dawn is 4, destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater. Dusk is 5, return all creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to your hand. This is just a great way to get some of those creatures back that originally just weren't going to be able to come back. So, Faithless Looting is 1, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards with a flashback of 3. Finale of Promise, X and 2 red. You may cast up to 1 target instant card and or up to 1 target sorcery card from your graveyard, each with converted mana cost X or less without paying their mana costs. If a card cast this way would be put into your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. If X is 10 or more, copy each of those spells twice. You may choose new targets for those copies. So this isn't necessarily a win condition, but it does help to close up the gap. Super good in this deck. Ignite the Future. This is 4. Exile the top 3 cards of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play those cards. If a spell was cast from your graveyard, you may play cards this way without. Or if this spell was cast from your graveyard, you may play those cards without paying their mana cost. It's 4 to cast and 7 to flashback. Next, we have Increasing Devotion. This is 5. Create 5 1/1 white human creature tokens. If the spell was cast from your graveyard, create 10 of those tokens instead. 5 to cast and 9 to flashback. Next, we have Mass Diminish. This is 2 until your next turn. Creatures target player controls have base power and toughness 1/1, and it has flashback for 4. The downside to this card is that it's a sorcery. The upside is that if you have Elsha in play, you can cast it as though it has flash. Casting this with flash can be the end of an opponent, basically, because if they unwittingly swing in thinking that they have a board of really massive creatures, and then you cast this with flash, bringing them all down to 1/1s, and then block and destroy them all, your opponent is left wide open for the crackback. Next, we have Mystic Retrieval. 4, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. It has flashback for 3, one of those being red. Next, we have Quiet Speculation. This is very important in this deck. 2, search target player's library for up to 3 cards with flashback. Put them into that player's graveyard. Then that player shuffles his or her library. This is a great way to, in the early game, to get some of those draw card flashback cards into your graveyard, so you can cast those relatively early, especially cards like Deep Analysis. Next, we have Runic Repetition. This one is 3, return target exiled card with flashback you own to your hand. This is super, super good to get it was called Devil's Play. Yeah, Devil's Play, back from exile. to your hand so you can utilize it again as a win condition, or really any flashback spell that really needs to be brought back at that particular time. Next, we have Scour All Possibilities. This is 2, scry 2, then draw a card, flashback 5. Next, we have Seize the Storm. This is 5, create a red elemental creature token with trample. And this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard, plus the number of cards with flashback you own in exile. So this can be part of your win conditions. It creates a creature that's very similar to Crackling Drake, but instead of flying has trample, that can get relatively large. It also has a flashback cost of 7, which means that Sevinne can copy that, and we can see several tokens hit the table with this ability. It is susceptible, of course, to board wipes, or even really targeted removal. So Devil's Play is really the better option, but this is a fantastic option. Next, we have Savines Reclamation. This is 3, return target permanent card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If this spell was cast from your graveyard, you may copy this spell and may choose a new target for the copy. And then it has a flashback of 5. And then finally, we have Structural Assault. Structural Assault is 5, destroy all artifacts, then Structural Assault deals damage to each creature equal to the number of artifacts that were put into graveyards from the battlefield this turn. So this functions like a board wipe to some degree. It's going to wipe out all the artifacts, and if there's enough artifacts in play, it could potentially also wipe out all the creatures. I see no downside to this, aside from the fact that you lose your own artifacts. Speaking of artifacts, we're going to move into artifacts. And again, like I said, I'm not running Twinning Staff because I just didn't have one on hand. It's not like I couldn't just, I guess, buy one, but you should run Twinning Staff if you can, just for the shenanigans, I guess. We start with Arcane Cygnet. This card costs 2. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color that your commander's color identity has. Next, we have Azorius Chauncery 2. You can tap 1 and it to create Azorius colors. We have Boros Chauncery 2. You can tap 1 and it to create Boros colors. We have Catalyst Stone. Catalyst Stone is 2. Flashback costs you pay cost 2 less, up to 2 less, and flashback costs your opponents pay cost 2 more. So it taxes your opponents, it discounts your cards, and if you don't have some of these other things like Lear, Disciple of the Drowned, or Backdraft Dragon, this is another fantastic way to reduce the cost of flashback. Next, we have Commander Sphere. This is 3. You can tap it to add a mana of any color that your commander's color identity, and you can sacrifice it to draw a card. Next, we have Izzet Signet 2. You can tap 1 and it to create Izzet colors. Next, we have Soul Ring 1 to tap for 2. And then finally, we have Magic Mirror. This guy costs 9, but it costs 1 less to cast for each instant or sorcery card in your graveyard. It says that you have no maximum hand size, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you put a knowledge counter on Magic Mirror and draw a card for each knowledge counter on Magic Mirror. So this is the card that I chose to replace Twinning Staff since I didn't have the Twinning Staff laying around. And this one is just really super good when it comes to drawing cards. While at first you're drawing the 1 card, eventually it becomes 2, then 3, and so on and so forth. Eventually your opponents have to find a way to deal with it, or they could let you deck yourself. I don't know. But it's just a really good alternative to the Twinning Staff. Next up, we're going to look at enchantments. We have Burning Vengeance. This is 3. Whenever you cast a spell from your graveyard, Burning Vengeance deals 2 damage to any target. Great way to deal incremental damage. Then we have Jace's Sanctum. This is 4. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you get to scry for 1. So not only do you get to set up your next turn, potentially, but you also get a discount on your instants and sorceries. Next, we have Leyline of Anticipation. This guy is 4. If it was in your opening hand, you can begin with it on the battlefield, and you may cast spells as though they had flash. The reason this is insanely good in this deck is not only because it gives your sorceries flash, but it also gives your creatures flash, and therefore turns this deck into a draw-go deck. So you would draw on your turn and then end your turn, so that you could use your cards during your opponent's turn as opposed to during your turn. And it just gives you that huge flexibility that having flash gives you. Next, we have Ominous Roost. This is 3. When Ominous Roost enters the battlefield, or whenever you cast a spell from your graveyard, create a 1/1 blue bird creature token with flying, and this creature can block only creatures with flying. The downside, obviously, being that these creatures can only block creatures with flying, but, you know, we could try and create a nice little army here and attack my opponents, although they only have 1 power. Next up, we have Secrets of the Dead. This is 3. Whenever you cast a spell from your graveyard, you get to draw a card. Next, we have Whirlwind of Thought. Last, we have Whirlwind of Thought. 4. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you get to draw a card. So we got a ton of ways to draw cards here to help us keep up, I guess. Then we have Planeswalkers. There's actually 2 of these guys. First one is Ral Storm Conduit. It costs 4. Has a passive. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, Ral Storm Conduit deals 1 damage to target opponent or planeswalker. For +2, you get to scry 1. And for -2, when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, you can copy that spell and choose new targets for the copy. Next up, we have Saheeli, Sublime Artificer. This guy is 3. Has a passive. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you get to put a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token into play. For -2, target artifact you control becomes a copy of another target artifact or creature you control until end of turn, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. I talked about this a long time ago when this first came out, when Is It Phoenixes was still big in Standard, because essentially what you can do is turn one of your little 1/1 servos into a Crackling Drake and really cause mayhem with it. And it's the same with this deck. You want to use it with Crackling Drake or one of those elementals with Trample that has the same ability as Crackling Drake to really put a lot of pressure on your opponents. Next, we're going to look at non-basic lands. Go through here. Non-basic lands is the most important part that I had to fix here. This deck had a ton of lands that came into play tapped and had no option to come into play untapped. The problem with that is that significantly slows down your ability to play in any kind of average match. And since I build these decks up to the average, it's really important that they get removed for something a little bit faster. So we're going to start out with Ash Barrens. This guy taps for colorless, and it also has basic land cycling, so we can go out and try and get that color that we need specifically. Next up, we have Azorius Chauncery. This is the bounce land for blue-white. We have Boros Garrison, the bounce line for red-white. We have Command Tower. You can tap it for your commander's color identity. Exotic Orchard taps for whatever colors your opponent's lands can produce. We're running 3 colors, so it's pretty useful. Fabled Passage was put in here in place of, I think, not exotic, Evolving Wilds, because I just think Fabled Passage is downright better. Hallowed Fountain is the shock land for blue-white. Is It Boilerworks is the bounce land for red-blue. Myriad Landscape. So this is a card that I am still waffling on whether I want to remove it for Terramorphic or Evolving Wilds. The reason I like Myriad Landscape is that it can be tapped for colorless, or you can tap to sacrifice it to get 2 lands, as opposed to just the 1. The downside here being that it comes into play tapped as opposed to Terramorphic or Evolving Wilds. I still have to do some playtesting with this to see which I feel is the better fit. Then we have Mystic Monastery. It taps for Jeskai colors and enters the battlefield tapped. Next, we have Needle Verge Pathway. I put Needle Verge in here because I did not have an extra Sacred Foundry. And I didn't want to put Battlefield Foundry. Is it Foundry? I can't remember what it's called in here because I didn't want to have the Pain Land. I think this is just as versatile. Comes to play either as a red or a white. Still a good use. I also didn't have... well, I already said that. Sacred Foundries. Next up, we have Prairie Stream. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. And is blue-white. Counts both as plains and island. Next, we have Ragran Triumph. Taps for Jeskai colors. Comes into play tapped, but also counts as an island, mountain, or plains. Next, we have Scalding Tarn. Scalding Tarn also replaced a Terramorphic or Evolving. There was a Terramorphic Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse and an Evolving Wilds in this deck. I decided to go for the Scalding Tarn and the Fabled Passage because in both cases, the card that I fetch can come into play untapped. Next, we have Steam Vents. This is Shockland for red-blue and also counts as an island and a mountain. Then we have Stormcarved Coast. This is a check land for red-blue. Sulphur Falls, another check land for red-blue. Sundown Pass, a check land for red-white. And then Temple of the False God, because it creates that 2 colorless. Lastly, we're going to take a look at the basic lands. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 islands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mountains. And 1, 2, 3, 4 plains. Okay, so that is the upgraded Savine the Chronoclasm. This is actually the 3rd time I've upgraded it. The last couple of times, it just wasn't at the level that I needed to perform at. So yeah, if you have any questions or comments, leave those down below. Keep it positive. I will be removing negative comments. And that's it, guys. Until next time. Peace.